Redditors, what's the weirdest thing a medical professional has casually said to you? I was living in a foreign country and had a cold/flu type illness. Went to the doctor and he comes in eating a bowl of cereal. Already weird. Checks some things and says, "Do you know what AIDS is?" And I'm in complete shock and I say, "Yes, I do." And he follows up with, "It's a virus and there's no cure." Then goes on to explain why there is no cure, all while I'm seeing my life over as I know it. Finally, he ends with, "But you don't have that virus. You have a different one. Much more common and treatable, but I wanted you to understand why an antibiotic wouldn't work." So, still in shock, I'm like, "So I don't have AIDS then, right?" And he goes, "No," and then walks out. What a roller coaster. Edit. This was in Switzerland about 15 years ago, and I'm American. Yes, he was slurping his cereal the whole time. Next story. After destroying my knee riding a BMX at 17, the emergency surgeon said, "Wow, really effed that up." 10 years later, in another serious knee injury from riding, I saw the same surgeon. He did a great job on the first one. First words out of his mouth were, "I remember you. You effed up the other one, huh?" Next story. Back pain. I'm not young. Doctor just said basically, "Well, that's life for you. You're tall. So, doc, I'm just gonna end up being a hunched over 90-year-old? No, you're not gonna live to see 90. Excuse me? How many tall old people have you ever seen? Oh, yeah, okay. Next story. When I was 20, my endocrinologist took a good look at me and asked, "Are you okay with your face being so asymmetrical?" And I had never really noticed it before, but boy, have I noticed it since. Next story. Doc said to me, "If you don't mind, I'd like to show everyone pictures of your tonsils." According to her, I had the most disgusting tonsils she had ever seen in her years in the business, and gosh darn, she wanted to show them off. Next story. My previous OBGYN came through my line at my old job. For some reason, I blanked on who he was. Like, I knew him, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember how. He saw I was struggling and said, "Don't remember me? I'll give you a hint. Last time I saw you, you were in my office with your ankles in the air." Loudly, in front of everyone in a little line in front of old ladies fresh from church, waiting to buy flowers from the garden center. He was an amazing doctor and figured out what was wrong with me with I butchered this one so bad. Next story. My previous OBGYN came through my line at my old job. For some reason, I blanked on who he was. I knew him, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember how. He saw I was struggling though and said, "Don't remember me? I'll give you a hint. Last time I saw you, you were in my office with your ankles in the air." He said that loudly, in front of a line of little old ladies fresh from church wanting to buy flowers from the garden center. He was an amazing doctor and did figure out what was wrong with me when no other doctor could, but in that moment, the embarrassment could have killed me. Next story. When I was 12 years old, I had a dentist say to me, "Hold on, I think I might be counting wrong. You shouldn't have those yet." "Okay, never mind, those are definitely your wisdom teeth. Your mouth is just huge, I guess." They said it was the youngest they've ever seen anyone get their wisdom teeth. They called in every dentist in the building to come look at my mouth. Next story. When my girlfriend was in the ICU, one of the nurses sort of shrugged and said dismissively, "She's gonna die anyhow." She would have. Her kidneys had completely shut down and she was so swollen that her tongue wouldn't fit in her mouth. We were making the decision whether to continue life support or not, and she didn't die. A month and a half later, she walked out of the hospital and into my car for the ride home. Next story. I live in Ireland. The surgeon who replaced my hip, he's also a farmer. And the day before I was due to be discharged, he came in on his rounds and he said, "I may or may not see you tomorrow. It depends on the dog." So I said, "Okay, what's up with the dog?" And he told me the dog broke his leg and was having it set tomorrow, but he wasn't sure what time. So I said, "Sure, bring in the old dog and I'll mind him." This is rural Ireland beer in mind, and I was in the convalescent area of the hospital by then. And shortly after breakfast, he arrived in with the dog, lovely border collie with his leg in plaster. He stayed with me watching TV till the doc was finished replacing another hip and was ready to discharge me and we could all go home. It could only happen in Ireland. Next story. Not me, but mom. She's in remission for a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that invaded her brain. She was getting a scan to confirm the cancer had left her brain pan, and the doctor came in and said, "Good news! We've scanned your brain and can confirm there's nothing in there." Alright guys, I am loving this video so far. The doctor who was slurping on his cereal was a vibe, an awful, somewhat evil, but kind of funny vibe. And I also never realized that I don't often see tall old people, so that's also something I've learned, but I'm only 5'10", so I'm fine. I am left-handed though, and they don't seem to live as long, so I don't know. We'll see how that works out for me. But anyway, next story. Wait, Did he say he wanted to be awake? When I was in the operating room waiting to get my appendix removed, I met the anesthesiologist and asked him to make sure I didn't wake up in the middle of it. I didn't want to be aware of what was going on. He counted me down, and right before it all went black, he said to the surgeon, I remember thinking, "You a-hole," and then it all went dark. Next story. Whoops, I'm just gonna kind of tack it on. It'll probably hold. While having my fingertip reattached after a freak accident, as I left the ER, a different medical professional said to me, "Oh wow, they saved it? We were for sure you were going to lose it. We even placed bets." Edit. The whoops was a comment the doctor made after putting in one of the stitches. It did not inspire confidence. Edit number 2. For the story, at an out-of-town rehearsal dinner for a wedding my family was in the next day, my husband and I went to set up a pack and play for our youngest. The rails weren't locking into place, so we got on either end and grabbed the corners. Before I could get my hands in the right position, my pointer fingers were under the corner caps that cover the hinge area. My husband, a strong weightlifter man, pulled on his end as hard as he could. Left pointer finger nearly severed. Right pointer finger crushed and bone fractured but still attached. Pack and play, covered in blood. People freaked out. I did not pass out or throw up though. Husband took me to a nearby hospital and I stood in the wedding the next day as a bridesmaid. Next story. I was 18 at the time and went to the family doctor that brought me into the world. The reason was I was having great pain urinating and was leaking a pus-like substance. Then, after getting a shot, I went to his office. I sat down and he lit a Winston, rocked back in his chair while taking a big drag and said, "I'm gonna talk to you like a Dutch uncle. If you don't know if it's clean, keep your damn zipper zipped up." Next story. When I went in for my checkup 6 weeks after my second kid, and the intern who was shadowing my OBGYN made the comment, "Oh hey, you're looking great!" Not to my face, but to the bottom half of me. Next story. I snapped both of my Achilles while finishing off a set of heavy leg presses with calf extensions. I didn't close it all of the way and the sled crashed down on me, pinning my legs next to my head. Yes, I was dumb not to use the safety pins. They weren't there, and they constantly disappeared to other machines. So I was lazy for not using them and I paid the price. Eventually, the doctor looked at my scans and said, "These are mirror images of each other. You must have good form." Next story. So, in reference to the gaping wound in my leg, the doctor says, "Well, there's no scientific basis for you to be experiencing pain from that. There aren't any nerves in there." And then, another time while passing kidney stones, I was told, "We can't give you anything for pain because it could constipate you." Next story. A nurse of some kind took my blood pressure and he said what the numbers were. And I asked, "Is that good?" And he said, "I'm not qualified to give you a professional opinion on the matter. You should ask your doctor." And I asked, "But like, unprofessionally, is that good?" And he said, "Unprofessionally? Well, in my purely personal opinion that I'm sharing with you as an individual and not in any medical or official capacity whatsoever, you should buy stronger deodorant." Edit. For clarity, I was definitely stinky. I was homeless at the time. I was well aware of this fact. If you're worried you're a little funky, don't. You would almost assuredly notice if you smelled really bad. Next story. I go to urgent care because I have an earache and may have an ear infection. The nurse asks if I'm on any medication and I tell her about my IUD, and she says, "I could never have had an IUD or even take birth control, since that's murder and all. But hey, do whatever makes you happy." And yeah, I did report her and she did get in trouble. Next story. Walk-in clinic. Doctor was an old man. He asked where I live and I said across the street over JJ's Street Meats restaurant. And he says, "Street meat? We used to call prostitutes that." Okay, anyway, roll up your sleeve. We'll do your blood pressure now. Next story. I live in an area where many people collect and search hard for specific bourbons and whiskeys. My psychiatrist found out that I work at a liquor store and asks me about the whiskeys that my store has in stock for a solid 10 minutes. My appointments are scheduled to be 15 to 20 minutes long. Every single appointment. I'm just trying to get my mood stabilizer refilled. All right, I'm sorry, but if that was me, I'm calling the doc out. Well, actually, I don't know. Maybe he'd sabotage with a bad prescription instead as retaliation. I don't know, but I'm like, "Hey, doc, I got 15, 20 minutes here, and you're spending 10. All right, just come to the store. I'll hook you up. Now, can we talk about me, please? Gosh, that's really unprofessional. But anyway, next story. Was on a 72-hour hold following an attempt on my life on the anniversary of a traumatic event, and had a nurse ask if she could pray for me. I'm not religious, but I thought it was nice, and it was like 2 a.m. and I was tired, so So I said sure. She proceeded to pray out loud for like 30 minutes asking Jesus to forgive me for the huge sin I had committed. Not the direction I thought she'd go in, but just said a very awkward thank you after that and went back to sleep. Next story. My gynecologist, while trying to remove my IUD when the strings weren't visible and fishing through my cervix, with local anesthesia, thank God, said, "Come here, kitty, 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 kitty." And in all honesty, I think he spaced out and was very concentrated to avoid unnecessary pain. Uterus wasn't happy with the invasion, and he most definitely has cats, and the words just came out. He bursted out laughing with embarrassment and said sorry more than I could have cared to count. Honestly, I thought it was hilarious. I've been seeing him for a long time for many IUDs, and he's a gem. Next story. No matter what problem I arrived with to the practitioner's office, anemia, tonsillitis, gastritis, or flu, he'd always say that was due to the lack of sex. He would always include that line, and I quote, "have more sex," in prescription for medication. Next story. My OBGYN was about to start sewing me up after a C-section when she noticed a cyst on my ovary. She told me it had caused enough torsion to twist it down and start growing into my uterus. Then after that said to my husband, "Hey, take a look at how twisted this is. Don't worry, this will only take a second and I won't charge for it," while proudly displaying my entire reproductive system with both hands. He's a trooper. Didn't look grossed out or anything, just a very deadpan, "Well, thanks for not charging us for that." Next story. I was getting my blood drawn for a mono test back around 2006. The older lady nurse asked me what sort of music I liked. I figured she was making small talk to get my mind off of the needles, so I started to rattle off a few bands that I'd been listening to. One of them happens to be Postal Service, and she says, "Oh, I know that one." And I reply, "Yeah, it's the same lead singer as Death Cab for Cutie." And she says, "I know, he's my son." Next story. Things I have heard during pelvic exams. Crap. Wow. Okay, you're a girl. Bear in mind, I am a normal, healthy cisgender woman with the regular parts in the regular places. I have just had some wacky doctors. Next story. The first OBGYN I went to was in the same group medical practice as my father, a pediatrician. While getting a routine pap after my dad had retired from medicine, the GYN says, "How's your dad doing? Is he enjoying retirement?" And, "My man, can we not talk about my dad while you're knuckle deep in my hot pocket?" Next story. I had severe pelvic pain that got worse over time after an IUD. Had it for just over a year. Went back to the doctor insisting something was wrong. She insisted, though, that there was no way my pain was caused by the IUD and that I just needed pelvic floor therapy or cognitive therapy and antidepressants. I was furious. Eventually saw another doctor who said he could promise me my pain was from the IUD, based on 2 ultrasounds done by the old doctor. So he pulled out the IUD, and by the time I had walked back out to my truck, my pain was gone. Next story. Nurse during a gyno exam looking at my large owl tattoo on my calf said, "Is your tattoo a fish?" "No, it's an owl." Then she says, annoyed, "Well, it needs to be touched up then." The tattoo was less than a year old and very obviously an owl. I don't know what she was going on about. All right, y'all, so what's going on at the OBGYN office? I don't go there, obviously, but we're getting more OBGYN stories than I thought we would. I was kind of expecting some more dental screw-ups. We've been getting a couple of those sneaked in lately, but I don't know what's going on at the GYN office, but they're a little kooky, it seems. Anyway, next story. So, I was about 18 years old when I first had a pilonidal cyst at the base of my spine. Was excruciating. Couldn't walk, couldn't sit, just pain all of the time. So, go into the doctor and they lance and drain the cyst, put in some gauze and tell me it is going to continue to drain and I need to go see a specialist in a couple of days. First day though, I feel so much better. Pressure is gone and I can move normally again. Second day, some pain is back and I'm getting concerned again. Third day, everything is worse than before, and I head into the specialist and tell him so. So there I am, bent over this table with my shorts around my ankles when I hear this doctor exclaim, "Holy crap!" So I naturally assume I'm going to lose my whole ass and everything is coming to an end for me. Then he follows up with, "Did they use an entire effing roll of gauze?" As he starts to look like a magician pulling out a never-ending line of handkerchiefs out of my ass. Felt infinitely better after that, but for a moment there, I thought the worst. Next story. On the first visit, he told me he was living in a motel for his temporary job, and the reason the job was temporary was that he knew he was probably going to go to jail. So, right after that visit, I rented a house to him. It was 18 months while the case slowly went through the system, and he was still my doctor. He ended up with 5 years in prison, and the doctor who hired him also ended up going to jail for 18 months. Next story. Well, if you want to lose weight, you should cut down to 800 calories a day and work out 30 minutes for 5 times a week. I was breastfeeding at the time, and this jerk tried to give me an even bigger eating disorder than the one I was teetering on the brink of. Then another time I was told, "You sure you want to be put under to remove the lipoma? It'll take longer to put you under than to get it out." Okay, you probably would have passed out anyway. People usually do when we cut on them so close to their vital organs. And this doctor, he did a good job, but I regret going back to him for another surgery because it didn't go smoothly the second time around. And then finally, third, I was told, "When I burnt this wart off, it's going to smell like hot dogs." And he was right. I was 16 and asked my mom if we could get an extra long chili cheese coney when we were done. She was totally disgusted, but I got one. Next story. A neurologist, after reviewing my MRI after a very low-speed car accident, said to me, this renowned doctor, "So, you have no pain or tingling in your arms or legs?" "No, I don't." "Okay, how?" And apparently, it turns out my results show that I should either have been in constant excruciating pain or have some paralysis. And she was just so shocked that she lost her ability to show emotion. Every day, a blessing. Next story. With one leg on his chair, Captain Morgan style, in the middle of a rather lengthy conversation, and as an aside says, "So they're probably gonna run a wire up into your heart and give it a little shock to put an extra beat in there. If it gives you a lethal arrhythmia, we'll know something's actually wrong, but it should just stabilize on its own." And then I stopped and asked, "Did you just say you were going to try and give me a heart attack, and if I don't die, I'm fine?" And then he said, yes, I guess, but that's why we're doing it in the hospital." Next story. I went to see a headache specialist MD after being diagnosed with cluster headache. She asked me to describe the symptoms. After I did, she said, and I quote, "You men, you're all alike when it comes to pain. Well, let me tell you something. Childbirth is way more painful than cluster headaches." And I never went back to her again. Next story. After my third miscarriage, my OB came into the room, sat down, looked me in the eyes, and said, "This effing blows." She must be a fantastic reader of people because I can't think of anything the doctor could have said that would have made me feel better. But that didn't. Next story. I was in the hospital for a few months last year. I got to know one of the nurses pretty well. She pretty much told me that during COVID, they had to scam insurance companies. She worked on the internal healthcare ward, specifically for lung problems, so the ward was pretty much full with COVID patients, and everything else was pushed back. After a few months, they noticed how all of these appointments that were pushed back all became cancer patients, so they pretty much all worked together to get patients their appointments anyway. Apparently, a lot of people quit because they couldn't deal with telling someone there was no room for them in the hospital, only for them to then tell people the same thing if they had found the cancer sooner that they stood a chance. Next story. So we found this funny, but I often wonder if the nurse ever thinks about it and feels embarrassed. Nurse came barreling into our curtained-off area of the ER, and my mom was on a stretcher with broken vertebrae from falling off of her horse. Then the nurse says, "Whoa, it smells like barn in this ER. Sometimes you gotta wonder if some people know how to bathe." Then she looks at the chart and says, "Oh, you fell off your horse at the barn." Next story. When doing a phone call with my surgeon, I asked what my lifting restrictions were after a double hernia repair, and he said to me, "Use your best judgment." Dude, bro, my best judgment gave me 2 hernias because I thought, oh yeah, I can definitely carry that anvil across the yard, no problem. Next story. 1 week follow-up call after my surgery. My surgeon says, "I put in dissolvable stitches." Then I send him after the phone call a photo of the stitches. Then surgeon's assistant calls 3 minutes after the email and says, "Hi, we'd like you to come in immediately and get those stitches removed." Next story. My favorite mishaps that I've made. Asked a patient how tall he was. Looked up from my computer and realized he was a double amputee. Another time I said, "How are you today?" Meanwhile, I'm literally there to fly them out in a helicopter because they are, in fact, having a monumentally bad day. Another time I said, "So, Do you have any living children? While the patient is holding a baby on her hip. Guys, sometimes it's hard to think and talk and do crap all at the same time. I'm sorry healthcare workers are insensitive idiots. Next story. A nurse I worked alongside with told me one time, "God, you don't need to medicalize everything," about knee pain that I had mentioned. Once, I felt too ashamed to go to the doctor after that, and anyway, that's how I walked around on a dislocated knee for a year. Next story. I had to have my shoulder put back into place after a dislocation while I was on a date with my now wife. The doctor said, "Well, you're gonna be a pretty expensive date tonight." Then he spent about 10 minutes putting it back in as I tried not to throw up from the pain. My wife said I was the first guy she ever took home because after that night she didn't think her United States Marine Corps dad would be able to intimidate me. Next story. Oh, there were plenty when my mom was dying in the hospital. First, there was when she went to a random ER on vacation and the radiologist waltzed in and told her, looks like you've got stage 4 lung cancer. Excuse me a moment," and then walked right out of the effing room without another word. 3 weeks later, when she was dying in another ER and we were still trying to figure out where the cancer came from even, the oncologist rolled up to my sister, Dr. Pepper in hand, and told her, "You know, there's no hope for her, right?" Effing a-hole was lucky I wasn't in the room at the time. And the whole thing was just a really eye-opening look into the huge lack of compassion in the medical industry. For those wondering, after she died, we had an autopsy done. Anaplastic thyroid cancer. Rare and extremely aggressive. Next story. Hey, can I have my finger back? I was 19 and had a fairly serious car accident. They needed to do a rectal exam to confirm there was no internal issues there. However, the doctor was extremely good looking and well, I'd never had anything going up there before. So my muscles clenched in embarrassment and in panic, and as a result, he asked me to relax so he could remove his finger. On top of my 3 most embarrassing moments. Next story. I was getting steroids to reduce some swelling and I asked my doctor, who was pretty awesome, if it had any side effects, and he said, "Not really. They turned me into a sexual tyrannosaurus." Next story. During a 6-month checkup, my daughter's neurosurgeon casually stated that he thought she had a 1% chance of survival when they did her emergency decompression craniectomy. She was 3 weeks old when they did that surgery. She not only survived, but thrived, and now at 2.5 years old, you'd never guess anything had ever happened to her, unless you watch her try to use her right arm or hand. But it was extremely sobering hearing him say that, and he clearly held it in until he saw that she was a miracle case and was exceeding all of their expectations. Next story. A former doctor of mine didn't say anything weird, it's just that everything he did say, he said while walking out of the door of the exam room. I genuinely never heard the second half of any of his sentences. The dude did it so often I thought he was trolling me. I had no idea what to do in response, so I just found a new doctor instead. This one is really peculiar in particular for me. This is almost like something you would find on r/mildly infuriating. It's not that big of a deal, but it is, but it's just so weird. I don't know, I'm like trying to wrap my brain around this innocuous but awful thing that's confusing. I don't know. Anyway, next story. For me, one time, the doctor said, "Oh, that's unfortunate you're having side effects. Let's double your dosage." Word for word, on a conversation about my seizure medication. You just can't do that. Then one time my boyfriend got, "Here, take these," as a doctor pulled oxys out of his pocket, no bottle, because he needed infected stitches in his thumb removed. That was odd. He didn't take them and removed them at home himself. Next story. I've answered this exact question before, but after I had to go to the hospital and they thought they saw a cyst in my testicles in the CT scan, they sent a nurse in to ultrasound. She literally walked in and said, "I'm gonna have to fondle your balls for a minute," and then I responded with, "Sorry, but it's been a while." Next story. My partner, a professional dancer, just had a hip surgery a few months ago, and she's morbidly fascinated with the details of surgery and what the surgeons see. When she had her follow-up with the surgeon the day after, she asked how her muscles were looking. She was worried that they had gotten weak, and without a moment's hesitation, his response was, "It looked delicious. That's the filet mignon muscle on a cow. Yours looked strong and juicy," and she was over the moon, and I was speechless. Next story. My doctor, as he's rooting around inside my abdomen, said, "Huh? What is that? I've never seen one of those before." It turns out it wasn't something inside of me. The nurse was handing him an instrument that was new to him. I was sure flabbergasted for a minute, though. C-section, so I was awake. Everything came out great, though. He used the instrument without a problem. Next story. I was 7 or 8 years old getting a digital rectal probe, and I was vocally upset. My mom was with me in the examining room, and the doctor said, "Relax, it can't hurt that bad." I was a child with a finger up my ass. It's like a regular adult with Andre the Giant's finger up his ass. Next story. Went to the doctor's for some wild stomach pain. He pressed on my stomach a few times and goes, "I think you're full of crap." I was insulted and said, "No, but I'm really having painful stomach attacks. Maybe there's image or blood testing that you can do." And he presses once more before looking at me and says, "I'm not saying you're lying. I'm saying you are full of crap. Literally, you're backed up." And then the doctor starts laughing. Next story. I'm a guardian for my older brother who is mentally 2 to 4 years old. He had a seizure and I met him and his caregiver in the hospital. No one could figure out what happened that had him refusing to walk after his seizure. Multiple EMT, nurses, and doctors had seen him by the time I had arrived without anything planned or pain meds given. I asked for details of what occurred during the seizure from his aide and was told he fell on his side. And I was like, "Oh, okay, is there any bruising on his leg?" "No, not really," what was the first response. And I asked my bro if I could look at his leg, and he was hesitant, but finally let me. Sure enough, there's this tiny little bruise on his hip towards the head of his femur. I put 2 and 2 together and asked the doctor about getting x-rays. He begrudgingly agreed. So we get back from the x-rays and come to find out that he broke the head of his femur completely through. Effing terrible. This kid was in pain for 24 hours before anyone told me about what had happened. No pain meds at all. My brother is pale AF, hardly responding to things he enjoys, and he has a bead of sweat on his brow. Then here comes the most asinine response that caused me to lose my crap on the doctor. I said to him that now that it's confirmed the issue is a broken bone, can we get my brother some pain meds? Then the doc says, "Do you think he needs it?" And my response was along the lines of, "Gee, doc, I don't know. How do you think you would feel if you broke your femur in half? Do you not normally administer pain meds for patients in similar situations?" And I stared at him with utter irritation plastered on my face. He confidently said, "Well, yes, but he seems fine." And wow, he seems fine? The F he does. I've already told you he does not act like this normally. He doesn't randomly sweat, guard his body, or look so pale. If he wasn't in pain, he'd be running around in circles in front of us. Just because he can't verbally express his pain doesn't make him impervious to pain. He is clearly exhibiting non-verbal cues of pain. Yes, he needs pain meds. And I am so glad that I have a legal guardianship of my brother. I cannot imagine how others get through our healthcare system without an advocate. Sadly, this experience wasn't our first or last time dealing with something like this. Next story. After an almost successful alcohol-fueled self-unaliving attempt, the doctor was asking me about my drug use. I told him that alcohol was the only thing that I used recreationally, and he said that I had tested positive for something, I don't remember, and I pointed out that it wasn't until after the surgery that they took blood to test and asked if the drugs the anesthesiologist used would account for that, to which he replied, "You're too smart for your own good." Still, I'm not sure what he meant by that. Next story. Before my grandmother passed away, she was in the hospital, and a nurse tried to gently explain that my grandmother had Down's syndrome. And I sort of laughed and I said, "I assume that was a slip of the tongue, but yes, she has had episodes of sundowning." And the nurse, she got very upset and said that Down's syndrome is no laughing matter, and I need to accept that my grandma had it and that it was typically progressive. Spoiler alert, my grandma did not have Down's syndrome. Next story. I was 13, recently in remission for leukemia, was at the hospital one morning for a bone marrow aspiration to confirm that I hadn't relapsed. I'm sitting there in the waiting room with my mom with the anesthesiologist who comes in to do the normal speech and gets forms signed by my mom before the procedure. Then he starts making small talk with me. "So you're 13. What do you like in school? What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I told him I wanted to be an oncologist when I grow up. And he immediately says, "Oh, no. You don't want to do that. It's impossible to make money in medicine anymore since Obamacare got passed." And my mom shot him a look that basically said, "Dude, what the F? If he wants to be a doctor, don't discourage him." And well, I'm grown up now, and I'm an attorney. But my older brother is a doctor, and my firm represents a bunch of doctors, and they all make way more money than I do and work fewer hours. So that anesthesiologist was wrong. Next story. I had a case of molluscum contagiosum, something like that, not sure of the spelling, and it was on my crotch. The woman doctor then put a purple medicine, I think it was called gentian, on the papules. She needed to dry them off before I could get dressed, but the hair blower she wanted to use was broken, so she put her face between my legs and started vigorously blowing her breath on them. Then she said, "Lesbian BJ," she exclaimed, and then chortled at her own joke and continued blowing. Next story. First, we have the good weird, to which the doctor said, God watches over fools and little boys, which a surgeon to my 13-year-old son said while re-breaking his finger that had healed wrong. Then bad weird was when the doctor said, why are all of you women like that? I have a baby and a toddler. I'm too tired to have sex. And then you're shocked when this happens. What did you expect? As for me, I was in a hospital with mastitis, and the tests they had given me during admission showed a false positive for gonorrhea. They sent me to a venerologist who was an old guy, and he said that to me. Whatever this was. Next story. Aorta dissected in November last. As the surgeon was standing over me all strung up in the theater, he says, Mr. OP, I need you to understand that this procedure only has an 80% success rate. He then hit the plunger for my meds, and I went out. When I woke up 6 hours later, he was amazed. And then he told me, you are either Superman or you're too dumb to die. And then, when he discharged me, he said, all right, look, the flapper we put in you has a 40-year lifespan, and no one has ever completed that. You are only 40 and can definitely live to 80, and we're studying you, so don't F it up. 5 out of 7, perfect score. And to be honest, I would let that dude do just about anything he wanted as long as he was the same level of confidence as he was that week. Next story. During COVID infection, I, a previously healthy former EMT, woke up one morning with my heart doing 150. It's not supposed to do that. So I was on the phone with the doctor going over what was going on, and I lay out my vitals for the entirety of my infection. I had these because I was basically doing 2 patient contact reports on myself. Daily, temp, pulse, oxygen levels, BP, weight, when I was able to get out of bed, and a general note about how I felt, slept, ate, etc. And he tells me to stop taking my vitals because it's giving me anxiety and causing my heart to go to 150. Any guesses if I fired him? Next story. As I was being prepped for the anesthesia for surgery, the anesthesiologist jokingly says to me, you gotta stop getting sick. You're running out of things we can yank out of you with replacing them. Then the worst would be the idiot doctor who told me to cheer up when I told him I wished I was dead. Confirmed not actively wanting to self-unalive, but went to bed every night wishing I wouldn't wake up in the morning. And then he goes, cheer up. For F's sake. Next story. I punctured my leg with the back of my ice skate, fell down on my knees and the back of my skate went in. The wound never healed. 6 weeks later, I went in for an appointment and the doctor left the room, brought all of his colleagues back in, and he said, have you ever seen anything like this in your life? Because nothing comes between her and her Calvins. It was the 80s with the Brooke Shields Calvin Klein jean commercials and a tiny square of jeans that had been left in my leg. Next story. I was told, holy crap, you're effed up, by my chiropractor after I took my shirt off on my initial visit and he saw my spine. I was 14 and just suffered a herniated disc. But he apologized for his language, but then said, there's nothing I can do. You need surgery. If your doctor won't refer, then I'll call my friend who's a doctor and he'll do it. Surgeon said I was the youngest patient he had ever seen with a herniated disc by far. Next story. I had my first mammogram done, really young due to my family's history with breast cancer around that age. I was 29 for my first one, extremely young by most standards, and it was already uncomfortable being young in the waiting room with all of the women who were 50 plus giving me the oddest side-eye for being there. The nurse who checked me in said, in a not-so-quiet and extremely judgmental tone, you're awfully young to be having to do this now. Why are you here again? And I simply said family history, but like, really? Are you really calling someone out who is looking to take care of themselves? And oh, the results were benign, but they did find cysts in both breasts and I had to do a double biopsy. Next story. You were a hot mess inside. My OBGYN after I woke up in the operating room following my partial hysterectomy. I had/have extensive endometriosis and adenomyosis to the point endometrial tissue had attached to my other organs and was pulling on them when I had cramps. They couldn't remove it all, so I'm without a uterus, but I'm still bleeding every month. According to my doctor, I'm lucky because the endometrial tissue sometimes ends up in other places in the body, and some women experience bleeding from the nose, eyes, or other openings. Next story. Many years, decades ago, I went to my regular dentist for a yearly checkup and he had gone upscale, redecorated, fancy new equipment, etc. He used a then revolutionary tiny macro cam to show me my teeth and gums on a then big screen, pointing out this and that and really selling me on my need for adult braces. I said thanks, but no thanks, and he got very mock somber, pointed the cam at the very slight gap between my 2 upper front teeth and said, it's sad but true that when people see a gap in your front teeth, they assume you aren't intelligent. Then he gave me a feigned sad headshake at the injustice of it all and waited. Well, if there's one thing I'm not insecure about, it's my intelligence. And I literally and involuntarily laughed in his face. Also, never went back and changed dentists. What a dork. This guy's so corny. What the hell? He probably is just trying to upcharge everybody after expensively redecorating the dentist office, but the fake head shake, get out of here. Anyway, next story. Not exactly a medical professional, but leadership in a PBM mentioned they can predict a person's A1C quite accurately with AI from which prescriptions they are taking, which means we could eliminate all A1C testing moving forward, saving the company millions of dollars a year. This is despite the fact that a person's A1C value determines which prescriptions they take. This was a serious proposal that a team of 10 people worked on for 3 months before someone mentioned their logic error. Next story. Actually told this by a friend who is a doctor. He was doing a cervical smear on a patient when an earthquake struck. A noticeable shake, but not causing damage, not uncommon in our area. And without thinking, he quipped, "Did the earth move for you?" And then froze, thinking of a possible upcoming complaint to the medical council. Fortunately, the patient thought it was hilarious. Alright, y'all, so we've been having a lot of medical stories recently, and a lot of them have not been super duper positive, I'm gonna be honest. There have been some nice ones, there have been some good ones, and I'm sure not all medical professionals are like that. And in any job you go in, there's just going to be awful humans, but good lord, to hear these from doctors and medical professionals and whatever's going on in OBGYN offices, ladies, what the hell, I don't know. But anyway, guys, we are at the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching, commenting, have a really good day, and bye-bye!